The polished mahogany table caught the afternoon sunlight as it poured through the tall windows of the law office. I sat at the far end, watching tiny specks of dust drift lazily in the golden light, while my family gathered around with the impatience of people waiting for scraps. The leather chair creaked whenever I shifted, a small reminder that this next hour would be anything but comfortable. My name is Ethan Mitchell. I'm 34 years old, and I work as a financial analyst for a mid-sized investment firm in Chicago. It's the sort of job that sounds impressive when mentioned at social gatherings, but in truth it leaves you hollow, moving numbers from one column to another, helping the wealthy grow wealthier while wondering if any of it really matters. Still, I had taken the afternoon off to be here for Grandpa Joe's will reading. My father had already made it clear he thought I was wasting my time. Joseph never had a dime, he had said over the phone the week before, his voice sharp with contempt. Never did, never will. Even in death he's broke. But go on then. Use up your precious vacation time to hear how he left you his bottle cap collection, or whatever other junk he piled up in that wreck of a house. Now, seated inside the office of Hartley and Associates, I could feel his presence 3 chairs down, heavy and looming like a thundercloud ready to break. Richard Mitchell, never Dick, never rich, always Richard, sat with perfect posture in his tailored suit, salt and pepper hair immaculately combed despite the damp September air. Beside him, my stepmother Patricia, her hands glinting with jewelry enough to fund a charity, sat with her usual air of self-importance. My half-siblings, Connor and Madison, flanked them like decorative bookends, both staring at their phones with the practiced indifference of those who had never known what it meant to go without. The lawyer, Mr. Hartley himself, was a thin man in his 60s. His wire-rimmed glasses caught the light each time he moved his head. He cleared his throat, a small sound that somehow silenced the room. Phones slipped into pockets, conversations died down. "Thank you all for coming," he began, his voice steady, bearing the weight of years spent in meetings just like this one. "We are here for the reading of the last will and testament of Joseph Andrew Mitchell, dated August 15th of this year. 3 weeks ago, only 3 weeks before the heart attack that carried him away in his sleep." I swallowed hard, remembering the last evening I'd spent with him. We had sat together on his porch, sipping sweet tea as the fireflies rose into the dusk. He had looked tired, yes, but still full of that spark of mischief that had made him my favorite person in the world for as long as I could remember. "The estate, such as it is," Mr. Hartley went on, adjusting his glasses, "consists of the following. 1 property at 42 Elm Street, valued at approximately $35,000 due to its present disrepair. Personal belongings inside the property. 1 1994 Ford Ranger, not in working condition. And liquid assets totaling $847.16, held in a checking account at First National Bank." My father let out a harsh scoff, the sound sharp as broken glass. "Told you, broke as ever. Always was." Mr. Hartley's eyes flicked briefly toward him before he continued. "Mr. Mitchell left specific instructions for the division of these assets. To his son, Richard Mitchell, he leaves, and I quote, 'all the pride and ambition I never had, since he seems to value those above all else.'" The room fell still. Even Connor glanced up from his phone. My father's face reddened slowly, the color climbing from his collar toward his temples. "That's it." Patricia's voice rang out, high-pitched and sharp. "That's what he leaves his only son?" "There's more," Mr. Hartley replied evenly. "To Connor and Madison Mitchell, he leaves his complete collection of National Geographic magazines, in hopes they might one day discover the world beyond their screens." Connor gave a short laugh. Madison rolled her eyes. "Seriously? Old magazines?" To Patricia Mitchell, the lawyer went on, He leaves his mother's porcelain tea set, with the hope that she may one day learn to slow down and truly taste what she drinks. Patricia's mouth opened, then closed again, as if no words would come. I bit the inside of my cheek to keep from smiling. Even in death, Grandpa Joe could see through people more clearly than anyone I'd ever known. And finally, Mr. Hartley said, turning his eyes to me, to his grandson Ethan Mitchell, he leaves the house at 42 Elm Street, its contents the Ford Ranger and... He paused, reaching into his briefcase. This. He drew out a plain white envelope. My name was written on the front, in Grandpa Joe's shaky handwriting. Inside, I could see the corner of a banknote. One $10 bill, Mr. Hartley announced, with the explicit instruction that it be given to Ethan in this envelope, and that he, again I quote, know that some treasures aren't measured in dollars. The room erupted. My father's laughter was harsh, bitter, filling the air like smoke from a fire. $10. He left you $10 and that dump of a house. This is perfect. He leaned toward me, his eyes gleaming with cruel triumph. All those Saturdays you wasted with him, all those holidays you spent at his side instead of on family trips, all that time thrown away on a crazy old man who couldn't keep a real job. And this is your reward. $10. Connor and Madison joined in, their laughter echoing off the polished walls. Patricia dabbed at her eyes with a tissue, though I couldn't tell if she was laughing or pretending to cry. You know what this proves? My father continued, rising to his feet, his voice booming now. It proves I was right. He was nothing, a nobody. He lived in a crumbling shack and died with nothing to show for it. And you, he stabbed a finger at me, sharp as an accusation. You wasted your life on him. At least now you see what sentimentality gets you. A pile of junk and pocket change. I sat quietly, letting the noise wash over me like a rising tide. The envelope felt almost weightless in my hands. Mr. Hartley was speaking again, trying to restore order, but his voice was lost beneath the chorus of scorn. I wasn't listening to them anymore. I was remembering. I was 7 years old, seated at the kitchen table in my father's new house, the cold, polished house he had bought after the divorce. Patricia had just finished explaining the rules. Again. Your grandfather is not to come here uninvited, she had said, tapping her manicured nails against the countertop. If he shows up, you are not to answer the door. Do you understand? I had nodded, though I hadn't really understood at all. Grandpa Joe had always been welcome in our old home. He used to arrive on Sunday mornings with a box of donuts, or on quiet weekday afternoons with a book he thought I might like. But Mom was gone now, moved to Seattle for a job, Dad said, though I would later learn it wasn't quite so simple. And just like that, the rules of my world had changed. He's a bad influence, Patricia had insisted, filling your head with nonsense, encouraging you to waste time on hobbies instead of focusing on your studies. Your father works hard to give you opportunities. The least you can do is take advantage of them. Those opportunities, as it turned out, mostly meant endless tutoring and carefully chosen activities that looked impressive on a college application I wouldn't need for another 10 years. Piano lessons I dreaded. Mandarin classes where I spent more time watching the clock than learning a single character. Soccer practice with a coach who barked louder than he ever taught. You could be exceptional, my father would say, studying my report cards as if they were business reports. But exceptional requires sacrifice. It requires focus. It requires choosing the right influences. Grandpa Joe, of course, was the wrong influence. Yet he was the only one who truly saw me. Not the version of myself my father wanted to shape, polish, and optimize, but me. When the schedule became unbearable, when the pressure to be exceptional made it hard to breathe, I would slip away and ride my bike the 3 miles to Elm Street. Even then, Grandpa's house showed its age. Paint flaked from the shutters, the porch steps groaned under every step, the screen door refused to shut all the way. But inside it was warm. It smelled of coffee, old books, and the faint memory of pipe smoke. It felt like home in a way my father's house never did. "Ethan," Grandpa would exclaim, as though my visit was the finest gift he could imagine. Perfect timing. I was just about to start a project, and I need a good assistant with steady hands. The projects changed from week to week. Some days we tinkered with the old Ford Ranger, Grandpa teaching me the names of the parts, showing me how to fix things with patience and persistence. Other times we built birdhouses or patched up furniture from yard sales. Once we spent a whole afternoon sorting his coin collection, each piece carrying a story of where it came from and what history it had seen. "Your father thinks I'm teaching you to waste time," he told me once, holding up a 1943 wheat penny. "But I'm teaching you something more important. I'm teaching you to notice, to find value where most people don't bother to look." Those stolen afternoons became my refuge. But there was always a cost. "Where have you been?" my father would demand when I came home. Dirt on my hands, grass stains on my jeans. "The park," I'd lie, each time more convincingly. "The Hendersons saw you riding toward Elm Street," Patricia would add, because Patricia always had eyes everywhere. "Were you at that house again?" The punishments varied: being grounded, losing computer time, extra tutoring to make up for lost learning. None of it mattered. I always went back, because Grandpa's house was the only place I could just be Ethan. Not Ethan who had to be preparing for his future. By the time I was 10, the Cold War between my father and Grandpa had sharpened. "He's turning you against me," my father accused one night after finding a model airplane Grandpa and I had built, "filling your head with working-class nonsense. Do you want to end up like him? Living in decay. Dying with nothing?" "He's not living in decay," I argued. "His house is just old. His house is falling apart because he never had the ambition to keep it standing, because he spent his life in dead-end jobs instead of building something worthwhile. Is that what you want? To be a nobody?" That word nobody hung in the air, as though a person's worth could be reduced to bank balances and property values. As though Grandpa's patience, his laughter, his ability to find joy in the smallest of things, none of it counted because his truck was rusty and his house had peeling paint. That night I made a choice. I stopped sneaking around. Instead, I told the truth. "I'm going to see Grandpa Joe," I'd announce, helmet in hand. "No, you're not," my father would say. "You have SAT prep. I'm 10. I won't take the SATs for 6 more years. Successful people prepare early. Then I guess I'll be unsuccessful." The fights that followed were legendary. Doors slammed. Voices rose. Patricia would retreat to the bedroom with one of her migraines. Connor and Madison, still too young to face the weight of exceptional expectations, watched from the stairs wide-eyed. But I kept going. Every Saturday, unless I was physically stopped, I rode my bike to Elm Street. And Grandpa was always there, waiting on the porch with 2 glasses of lemonade, as though he had known I'd be coming all along. "Your father means well," he would say sometimes, when I arrived brimming with anger. "He just shows love differently than I do." "He doesn't show love at all," I would mutter. "He only shows disappointment." Grandpa would rock in his chair, the chains creaking with a rhythm as old as the house. Then he'd say, softly, "Disappointment is just love wearing a disguise it doesn't know how to take off." I didn't understand him then. Truth be told, I'm not sure I understand him even now. But I knew this: with Grandpa Joe I could breathe. I could fail and learn instead of being crushed by failure. The war reached its peak when I was 15. My report card showed a B+ in advanced math. Not a B, which would have been a disaster, but a B+, still not acceptable. "You're grounded," my father declared. "No more trips to Elm Street until that grade comes up." "It's already a good grade," I protested. "Good isn't enough. In this family, we are exceptional." I glanced at Connor, who had made the honor roll yet again. At Madison, fresh from winning a regional spelling bee. At Patricia, praised in the society pages for her charity work. At my father himself, whose success had built this carefully polished life. "Maybe I don't want to be exceptional," I said quietly. "Maybe I just want to be happy." The silence was heavier than shouting. My father's expression shifted. Shock, anger, disbelief, before settling on something close to pity. "Happiness doesn't pay the bills," he said finally. "Happiness won't get you into college, or build a career, or leave a legacy. Happiness is what people settle for when they fail at greatness." "Is that what Grandpa did?" I asked. "Settled for happiness?" "Yes," my father snapped, the word like a curse. "And look where it left him. That weekend I didn't go to Elm Street, or the next, or the one after that. Not because of punishment, I had stopped caring about those, but because I needed time to think. Time to understand what I was really choosing between. On one side was my father's path. Achievement, success, recognition. A life measured in wealth and trophies and square footage. On the other side was Grandpa's path. Simplicity, contentment, connection. A life measured in laughter, in quiet evenings, in love. At 15, the choice felt impossible. I wanted both. I wanted to matter in the world, and still be happy in it. I wanted to make my father proud, without becoming him. In the end, it was Grandpa Joe who made the choice clear. One afternoon, he appeared at my school. He was waiting near the bike racks in his faded jeans and worn flannel shirt, so different from the polished parents and shiny SUVs gathering the other children. "Thought you might need a ride," he said simply. "Dad will be furious," I warned. "Probably," he replied with a shrug. "You coming anyway?" I climbed into the truck. But we didn't drive to Elm Street. Instead, he took us out to the lake, to the quiet spot where we had fished together when I was younger. We sat on the tailgate, watching the sun spread gold, orange, and red across the water. "I won't be here forever," he said after a while. "And when I'm gone, you'll have to decide who you want to be. But there's something I need you to know." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a $10 bill. It was soft with age, edges worn thin. Holding it up to the light, I noticed small handwriting along one side. "This," he said, "was the first $10 I ever earned. I was about your age, helping Mr. Peterson fix his roof. My father told me to put it in the bank, save it for something sensible. But do you know what I did?" I shook my head. "I bought a book, The Count of Monte Cristo. Took me 3 months to finish it, and it changed my life. Not because it made me richer or more successful or anything people call exceptional, but because it showed me that treasure comes in many forms. And the best treasures often don't look valuable to anyone else." He handed me the bill. Up close, I could read the note written there. "First earned, best spent. JAM. Your father thinks I failed because I never built much wealth," Grandpa said quietly. "But Ethan, I've been rich in ways he may never understand. Rich in time to watch sunsets. Rich in stories worth telling. Rich in a grandson who sees me for who I am, not for what I own. That's the kind of wealth that grows in the heart." I held the bill carefully, already aware that I was holding something precious. "Keep it," he said. "And when the world tries to measure your worth in numbers, remember this. Some treasures don't fit in bank accounts. We stayed by the water until the sun dropped behind the horizon and the first stars appeared. Then he drove me home to face my father's anger. It was worth it. 19 years later, sitting in the lawyer's office, with my family's laughter still ringing in my ears, I opened the envelope. Inside was another $10 bill. Not the one Grandpa had given me at the lake. I still carried that one safely in my wallet, but a newer note, crisp and clean. Its serial number caught my eye. JE82415. J. Joseph Ethan? August 24th, 2015? I turned it over, searching for some clue as to why this bill mattered enough to be placed in a will. Well, my father muttered, gathering his things with theatrical disgust. I suppose that's that. Congratulations, Ethan. You've inherited a collapsing house and lunch money. I hope it was worth it. Richard, Mr. Hartley said gently, there is one more matter. Your father left a letter to be read only after the assets were distributed. May I? My father waved a hand, already halfway to the door. Go ahead. I'm sure it's more sentimental nonsense. Mr. Hartley adjusted his glasses and read aloud. To my family, such as it is, by now you have received what I left you, and I'm sure some of you are disappointed. Richard, you always were. Nothing I did was ever enough. I failed you not because I didn't provide, but because I couldn't teach you that providing isn't only about money. Patricia, Connor, Madison, you hardly knew me, and that was by design. I was kept at a distance. Too poor. Too unrefined. Too much of a bad influence. I don't blame you. You followed the example given to you. But Ethan, my boy, you saw me. You chose me even when it cost you. So I leave you the only treasures that mattered to me. My home, where joy lived even in its broken walls. My truck, which carried us to adventures worth more than any luxury car. And a reminder that true value isn't always visible to those who refuse to look closely. The $10 is not just money. It is a key. Begin with the serial number. Trust yourself. And remember, I have been saving for you all along, just not in the way your father would understand. All my love, Grandpa Joe. When the lawyer finished, silence filled the room. A silence heavier than before. A key, Patricia whispered, uncertain. What does that mean? It means he was senile, my father snapped. Yet even his voice carried a trace of doubt. Come on. We're leaving. One by one they filed out. My father lingered for a moment at the door, as if he might say something more. But then he turned and left, his exceptional family trailing behind him. Mr. Hartley waited until the door clicked shut. Then he spoke again. There is one more thing, he said softly. Your grandfather instructed me to give you this, but only after the others had gone. He handed me a second envelope. This one was heavier. Inside lay a brass key and a business card from First National Bank. On the back, in Grandpa's shaky handwriting, Safe Deposit Box 82415. Some treasures are worth hiding until the right person comes along. My hands trembled as the pieces fell into place. The serial number, JE82415. The bank box, 82415. He had planned this. He had left me a trail to follow. Did he say anything about what's inside? I asked. Mr. Hartley allowed himself the faintest smile, the first real one I had seen on his face. Only that he had been preparing for your future in his own way, and that the timing would make sense when you were ready. I thought of every Saturday on Elm Street, every project, every lesson about finding value where others saw nothing. Thank you, I said, rising to shake his hand. Your grandfather was a remarkable man, he replied. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. I left the law office with the key heavy in my pocket. The bank was only a few blocks away, but I walked slowly, letting the weight of everything settle. My phone buzzed again and again. Messages from Connor and Madison, no doubt, but I ignored them. First National Bank was the old kind of institution. Marble floors, high ceilings, the kind of place where footsteps echoed. A young clerk guided me into the vault, checked my identification, and left me alone with box 82415. It was larger than I expected. My hands shook as I slid the key into place, the tumblers clicking open. Inside, I found several things. First, a worn leather journal. I recognized it instantly, Grandpa Joe's coin log. But as I turned the pages, I realized it was more than a record. It was a map. Each entry listed not only the details of the coin, but its hidden worth. Pennies worth thousands, dollars worth hundreds. A lifetime of treasures disguised as pocket change. Second, a manila envelope. Inside were deeds and titles, not just for the house on Elm Street, but for 3 other properties I had never known he owned. Old houses in neighborhoods long forgotten when he bought them, now neighborhoods on the rise. Notes in the margins listed their current values. Numbers that made my professional mind spin. Third, bank statements. Not from the tiny checking account we'd heard about, but from investment accounts I had never imagined existed. Modest deposits, made faithfully for decades, quietly growing. The totals were astonishing. Not a fortune by my father's measure, perhaps, but more than enough for a lifetime of stability and freedom. And at the very bottom, wrapped carefully in tissue, a photograph. Grandpa Joe and me, both of us covered in motor oil, smiling from ear to ear. We had just repaired the old Ranger for the first time. I remembered that day, how proud we were, not because we had fixed something valuable, but because we had fixed it together. Behind the photo, one last note. Ethan, by now you understand. Value isn't about appearances. It's about knowing how to see what others miss. The house needs work. Start in the basement. The truck runs, if you know where to look, check behind the spare tire. Your father measures worth by accumulation. I measure it by appreciation. And you, my boy, have always known the difference. That is why this is yours. Use it well. Share it freely. And never let anyone tell you love is measured in dollars. Grandpa Joe. I sat there in the silence of the vault, surrounded by proof that the man my father had dismissed as a failure had been wiser and wealthier than any of us had guessed. But more than the money, more than the deeds, more than the coins, what filled that room was love. Years of patience, years of hidden care. Every small investment, every note, every treasure left behind had been for me, the grandson who chose him when everyone else had turned away. My phone rang. My father. Did you go to the bank? His voice was different now, hesitant, uncertain. Mr. Hartley must have told him about the key. Yes, I said simply. And I could have told him. Listed the properties, the accounts, the hidden coins. I could have rattled off numbers that might have made him rethink every dismissive word he had ever spoken about Grandpa Joe. But I didn't. I found what he left me, I said instead. And everything that mattered. A long silence stretched between us, filled with years of misunderstanding and missed opportunities. Ethan, he began, then stopped. Was there? Did he leave you anything else? I finished for him. No, Dad. He left you exactly what he thought you deserved. I heard him exhale sharply. I see. Do you? I asked, surprising even myself. Do you really see? Grandpa Joe saw everything. He saw how you measured worth and showed you what it felt like to be found wanting. He saw how you kept him from your other children and decided they didn't deserve the lessons he had to offer. He saw enough my father interrupted, but the word lacked its usual sharpness. I don't need a lecture from you. No, I agreed. You needed one from him, but you never listened. Another silence. Then, the house is probably full of problems. You'll need contractors, permits, God knows what else. I know some people. I'm good, Dad. Thanks. You can't be serious about keeping it. That neighborhood, that house, was where I learned everything important, I said. Where I learned to fix things instead of throwing them away. Where I learned that time is more valuable than money. Where I learned that being exceptional isn't about being better than everyone else. It's about being the best version of yourself. Ethan, I have to go, Dad. I have a house to look at. I hung up before he could respond. There would be time for conversation later, or there wouldn't. Right now, I had a treasure hunt to complete. The drive to Elm Street took 15 minutes, but it felt like traveling through time. Every landmark, the park where Grandpa had taught me to ride a bike, the ice cream shop where we celebrated my small victories, the library where rainy afternoons had stretched into storytelling marathons, brought back a flood of memories. The house looked exactly as I remembered. A little more worn, a little more tired. The key rested under the third flower pot from the left, just where it had always been. Some things Grandpa knew shouldn't change. Inside, the familiar smells hit me first. Coffee, old books, and that indefinable scent of home. Everything was as he had left it, down to the half-finished crossword on the kitchen table and the reading glasses folded on top of yesterday's newspaper. But I was looking for something specific. The basement door groaned as I opened it, wooden steps protesting under my weight. Grandpa's workshop waited below, tools hanging in precise order, projects in various stages lined up on the shelves. Check the basement carefully, his note had said. I searched with the eyes he had taught me to use. And there, in the corner behind the water heater, a section of wall looked slightly different. The mortar was lighter. I ran my fingers along the edge and felt the subtle give of a hidden panel. Took 20 minutes, but I finally discovered the mechanism. The panel swung open, revealing a space about the size of a closet. Inside, metal shelves held hundreds, maybe thousands, of coins, each in protective sleeves, each labeled with Grandpa's careful handwriting. These weren't the coins everyone knew about. These were the real treasures. I pulled one out at random, a 1933 double eagle, nearly mythical. Another, a 1913 Liberty Head nickel, one of only 5 known. Each coin was rarer, more valuable than the last. And then I saw the notebook on the top shelf. I sank to my knees on the cold basement floor. For Ethan, the cover read, "The Real Collection." Inside, in Grandpa's shaky handwriting, was the story. How he had collected not for himself, but for me. How he had quietly gathered pieces others overlooked. How he had hidden them, not from thieves, but from my father, who would have valued only the numbers. The final entry, dated a month ago, read, "Nearly complete now. Estimated value, $12 to $15 million. But the real value is giving my grandson the freedom to choose his own path. Ethan, you once said you wanted happiness more than exceptionalism. With this, you can have both or neither. The choice is yours." I sat there, surrounded by millions in rare coins, and cried. Not for wealth, not for vindication, but for the man who had spent decades building a future for a grandson who had simply loved him. My phone buzzed. "Connor, Dad's freaking out. What did you find?" Then Madison. "Was there really money? How much?" Then Patricia. "Your father would like to discuss the estate. Perhaps we were hasty." I ignored them all. I went upstairs to the kitchen, poured myself a cup of black coffee from Grandpa's old maker, and sat at the worn Formica table where we had shared so many conversations. The Ford Ranger's keys hung on the pegboard. "Check behind the spare tire," his note had said. I smiled, knowing what I would find. Sure enough, tucked behind the spare was a small metal box. Inside were the titles to the other properties, and a note: "The truck runs better than it looks, just like its owner. Take care of her, and she'll take you anywhere you need to go." I spent the day exploring the house, reliving memories. Every room held stories. Every object had meaning beyond money. The Afghan my grandmother had crocheted, the crooked but perfect bookshelf, coffee cans full of screws sorted by type because you never know when you might need exactly the right piece. As the sun set, painting the walls the same gold and orange I remembered, I realized the decision had already been made. On a lake tailgate, when a man handed a boy a $10 bill and taught him about treasure, I called Mr. Hartley first. "I want to set up a foundation," I said, "for kids who need what Grandpa gave me. A place to be themselves. A place to learn that worth isn't measured in achievements." "That's beautiful," he said. "Your grandfather would be proud." "He already was," I said, "and that made all the difference." Next, I called my boss and quit. The conversation was shorter than expected. When you no longer need a job, you stop needing to justify leaving it. Finally, as darkness settled over Elm Street and fireflies danced in the yard, I called my father. "I'm keeping the house," I said, simple and firm. "Ethan, be reasonable. Even if there's money hidden, the place is falling apart. You'll spend everything making it livable." "It's already livable," I said. "I lived here. Really lived. Not existed. Not prepared for life. Not built a resume. I lived." "You can't live in the past," he argued. "I'm not. I'm living in the present Grandpa made possible. He left enough. Enough to restore the house. Enough to help kids drowning in expectations. Enough to show there's more than one way to be exceptional." "How much is enough?" His voice was strangled, fighting disbelief. I could have told him the total, but some treasures Grandpa had taught me weren't measured in dollars. Enough to be happy. Enough to be generous. Enough to know I was loved by someone who saw my value, even when I couldn't see it myself. A long silence. Then, quietly, "I don't know how to value things I can't count." The most honest thing my father had ever said. "I know," I said gently. "Grandpa knew too. That's why he gave you what he did, not to hurt you, but to make you think. 3 children trying to earn your approval through being exceptional. But they never learned happiness. That's the inheritance Grandpa left you, the chance to learn." "It's too late," he said. "It's not," I insisted. "Connor's 25. Madison's 23. And I'm still your son, even if I choose a different path. It's not too late to learn what Grandpa tried to teach us." "Which was?" I looked around the kitchen. The crossword, the reading glasses, the chipped coffee cup. "That love isn't earned by being exceptional. It's given by being present. Success isn't measured by what you accumulate, but by what you appreciate. The best investment is in people who spend their irreplaceable time with you." I heard my father breathing on the other end of the line, processing ideas that went against everything he had built his life around. "The $10, he said finally. "It really was a key?" The serial number led to a safe deposit box. "But Dad, the money was never the real treasure. The real treasure was that he spent 40 years thinking about my future. Planning for it, protecting it. He could have lived easier, spent it on himself. Instead, he lived simply so that one day I could live freely. That's love. That's what you measure it in, not dollars, but decades of quiet sacrifice." "I need to think," my father said. "Take your time," I told him. "The door's open when you're ready. And Dad, he loved you too. He just knew you wouldn't believe it unless it came with a lesson." We hung up without saying goodbye. but somehow it felt more like a beginning than an ending. That night, I slept in my old room, the one Grandpa had kept exactly as I left it. Baseball trophies I'd earned before quitting to focus on academics. Model airplanes we had built together. Books he had bought at yard sales. Their pages yellowed but their stories still vibrant. In the morning I would start making plans. The house would need work, yes, but work done with love, the same way Grandpa had maintained it all those years. The foundation for the charity would take time, but I had time now. The coins would need careful evaluation, each handled with respect. But tonight, I simply lay in the small bed, listening to the house settle around me, feeling wealthier than I had ever imagined possible. My phone buzzed one last time. A text from Madison? Is it true? Was Grandpa really rich? I paused before responding. Yes, richer than any of us knew. Just not in the way Dad taught us to measure it. Then I turned off the phone and closed my eyes, falling asleep to the sound of crickets and the distant hum of the city, finally safe in the knowledge that I was home. The following weeks passed in a blur of discoveries. Every day revealed more secrets. The basement coin collection had been just the beginning. First edition books hidden in the attic, their pages uncut, their value astronomical. Furniture Grandpa had restored, deemed junk, was actually vintage, worth thousands. Even old photographs tucked in shoeboxes included rare historical images that museums coveted. But it was the letters that stopped me cold. Hidden in a false bottom drawer in his bedroom, tied with twine and yellowed with age, were dozens of letters between Grandpa Joe and my grandmother, who had died before I was born. These weren't love letters exactly, they were meticulous correspondence. Grandma, I discovered, had been a shrewd investor, gifted at seeing potential where others saw problems. She had started the coin collection, identified properties to buy, and mapped a long-term strategy for quietly building wealth. Joseph, one letter read, "The boy Richard is too much like his grandfather, who measured everything in dollars and died bitter. Promise me that if we have grandchildren, we'll teach them differently. Promise me we'll show them that wealth is a tool, not a goal, that it creates freedom, not chains." And he had promised, and he had kept that promise even after she was gone. I was reading the letters for the third time when someone knocked, hesitant, uncertain. Not the doorbell, just a knock. Connor stood on the porch, looking uncomfortable in designer jeans and a Princeton sweatshirt. We hadn't spoken since the will reading. "Hi," he said. "Hi," I replied. Can I come in?" I stepped aside, and he entered, scanning the house like a traveler in a foreign land. "I've never been here before," he admitted. "Dad always said," he trailed off. I know what Dad said. We stood in the living room, two brothers who had grown up in the same family but in different worlds. "Was it all true?" Connor asked finally. "What you told Madison, about Grandpa being rich?" "Define rich," I said. He looked frustrated. "You know what I mean. The money. Dad's been going crazy, hiring lawyers, trying to contest the will. He says Grandpa must have been senile, hiding assets, that you manipulated." "Stop," I said quietly. "Just stop. Is that why you're here? To spy for Dad?" Connor's shoulders slumped. "No. Maybe. I don't know. I'm here because—" He looked around again. "Because I realized I don't know anything about my own grandfather except that he was poor and Dad was ashamed of him. And now it turns out maybe he wasn't poor, and I still don't know him, and he's dead, and it's too late." I studied my half-brother, really looked at him. Behind the prep school polish, the carefully styled hair, I saw someone molded into an image of success that didn't quite fit. "It's not too late," I said. "Come on. Let me show you something." I led him to the workshop in the basement, not to the hidden coin room, but to the main area where Grandpa's tools hung in perfect order. "This is where he taught me to fix things," I said. "Not just objects. Myself. When Dad's pressure got too heavy, when I felt like I was drowning in expectations, I'd come here. Grandpa would hand me sandpaper, a piece of wood, and we'd work in silence until I could breathe again." Connor ran his hand over the workbench, worn smooth by decades of use. "What was he like?" So I told him, not about the money, the properties, or the valuable collections, but about the man who made up silly songs while we worked, who let me eat ice cream for breakfast on my birthday, who stood in the rain for hours to watch me play Little League even after Dad had forbidden it. "He sounds—" Connor paused, searching. "Kind." "He was the kindest person I've ever known." "Dad's not kind," Connor said, surprised even by his own words. "He's successful, driven, exceptional, but he's not kind." "No," I agreed. "He's not." We were quiet, letting the truth hang between us like a fragile spiderweb, suddenly visible. "Can I ask something?" Connor said. "If Grandpa hadn't left you money, if it had just been this old house and $10, would you still have kept it? Would you still be here?" I didn't need to think. Yes. Why? Because the money was never the point. The point was that someone saw me for who I was, and loved me anyway. The point was learning that there are different ways to be valuable. The point was, I gestured around the workshop at the tools, the projects, the lifetime of care. This, the life he built, not the wealth he accumulated. Connor was quiet. Then finally, "I'm majoring in finance because Dad expects it. But I hate it. I want to be a teacher." The confession hung in the air like a challenge. "So be a teacher," I said. Dad would. Dad would be disappointed. So what? He's disappointed anyway. At least be disappointed doing something that matters to you. Easy for you to say. You inherited millions. I laughed, surprising us both. "Connor, the millions aren't why I can say it. I can say it because Grandpa Joe taught me that disappointing people who only value you for achievements isn't a loss. It's freedom." Connor looked around the workshop again, seeing it differently now. Could you teach me what he taught you? Not about the money," he added quickly. "About the rest of it. About being okay with not being exceptional." "You are exceptional," I said, "just not in the way Dad measures it. And yes, I can teach you. Want to start with something simple?" He nodded, and I handed him a piece of sandpaper and a rough board, just like Grandpa had done for me years ago. We worked in companionable silence, the rasp of sand on wood filling the space where words weren't needed. An hour later, Madison appeared, letting herself in with the key I had given her. "Mom's going to kill you both," she said. "Connor, you were supposed to be at dinner. And Ethan, Dad's literally hired a private investigator to dig into Grandpa's assets." "Let him," I said. "He won't find anything Grandpa didn't want found." Madison perched on a stool, watching us work. Unlike Connor, she'd always been more observant, less willing to accept the family party line without question. "You know what's funny?" she said. "I actually remember Grandpa a little. Not much. I was only 5 when Dad cut him off completely. But I remember he gave me a silver dollar for my birthday once. Dad took it away, said it would just get lost, that I was too young to appreciate it." "Do you still want it?" I asked. She looked surprised. "What?" I led them upstairs to Grandpa's study, where his public coin collection was displayed. I found the album from Madison's birth year and flipped through until I found what I was looking for. A series of silver dollars, each one dated from a different year of our lives. "He saved one for each of us, every year," I explained. "Even after Dad stopped letting him see you. Even when he didn't know if he'd ever get the chance to give them to you." Madison's eyes filled with tears as she touched the protective plastic over the coins. 23 silver dollars, one for each year of her life, waiting patiently for a reunion that never came. He remembered me? He remembered all of us. He just wasn't allowed to show it. Connor flipped through his own album, 25 years of small treasures collected by a grandfather he'd been taught to dismiss. "We should go," Madison said finally, but she didn't move. "You could stay," I offered. "Have dinner. Look through more of his things. Learn about who he really was." They exchanged glances, a lifetime of conditioning warring with curiosity. "Dad would," Connor started. "Dad is hiring private investigators to dig up dirt on a dead man who loved him," I interrupted. "Maybe it's time to stop worrying about what Dad would do and start thinking about what you want to do." In the end, they stayed. We ordered pizza, Grandpa's favorite, pepperoni with extra cheese, and ate it on the living room floor, going through photo albums and laughing at pictures of Grandpa through the decades. He'd been handsome in his youth, with the same mischievous eyes that had twinkled at me from his weathered face. "Look," Madison said, pointing to a photo. "Is that Dad?" It was. My father, maybe 10 years old, grinning widely as he held up a fish. Grandpa Joe beside him with a matching grin. They looked happy. They looked like father and son who loved each other. "What happened?" Connor asked quietly. I'd wondered the same for years. "I think Dad decided that love had to be earned. And once you believe that, you spend your whole life trying to earn it instead of just accepting it. And you make everyone around you do the same." "That's really sad," Madison said. "Yes," I agreed. "It is." We spent the rest of the evening sharing stories. Mine about Grandpa. There's about growing up in the shadow of relentless expectations. By the time they left, something had shifted. We weren't quite a family yet, but we were no longer strangers. "Can we come back?" Connor asked at the door. "Anytime," I said. Grandpa's door was always open. I intend to keep it that way. After they left, I sat in Grandpa's chair, thinking about families and legacies and the different ways we inherit from those who came before us. My father had inherited his father's appearance, intelligence, and capacity for hard work. But somewhere along the way, he'd rejected the most important inheritance, the ability to find joy in simple things, to value people over achievements, to measure wealth in ways that couldn't be deposited in a bank. Now that inheritance had skipped a generation, landing with me, and I was determined not to waste it. 3 days later, the private investigator showed up. He was professional, polite, and explained he'd been hired to assess the estate's value for interested parties. "My father, you mean?" I said. He looked slightly embarrassed. "I can't discuss my clients, but I do need to ask about any assets that might not have been disclosed during the will reading." "Everything was disclosed," I said truthfully. "Everything Grandpa had wanted disclosed. Anyway." "I see. And the rumors about hidden collections? Valuable properties." "My grandfather collected coins. He owned some rental properties. It was all in the will." "And you haven't discovered anything since? Hidden rooms, safety deposit boxes, that sort of thing?" I thought about the false wall in the basement, the properties in up-and-coming neighborhoods, the millions in rare coins waiting to be quietly liquidated. "I've discovered that my grandfather was exactly who he appeared to be," I said. "A simple man who lived below his means and found joy in small things. If my father is hoping to find evidence of secret wealth, he's going to be disappointed." The investigator studied me, then closed his notebook. "I've been doing this 20 years. I've seen families tear each other apart over money. But I've rarely seen someone so at peace with an inheritance, whatever its size." "That's because the inheritance isn't the money," I said. "It's the lessons. and those can't be contested in court. He left, and I knew he'd report back that there was nothing to find, because that's what Grandpa would have wanted, for the real treasures to remain hidden until they could be used for their intended purpose. Over the next months, I quietly began liquidating the coins, working with discreet dealers who valued privacy. The first sales funded the restoration of the house, not to flip it, but to honor it. I hired craftsmen who could see the beauty in worn wood and aged brick. The foundation came next, the Joseph Mitchell Center for Youth Development, a place for kids to just be kids, to explore interests without pressure, to learn that their worth wasn't tied to achievement. Connor joined the board, bringing a teacher's perspective. Madison helped design spaces that felt like home, not institutions. My father watched from a distance, his anger gradually giving way to something else, bewilderment, maybe, or the first stirrings of recognition that there might be more than one way to measure success. He finally came to see me one cold February morning, almost 6 months after the will reading. I was in the workshop, refinishing a table I'd bought at an estate sale, when I heard his footsteps on the stairs. "You're getting good at that," he said, watching me work. "I had a good teacher." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "The investigator said there was nothing to find." "He was wrong," I said. "There was everything to find. Just not what you were looking for." "Ethan, Dad, Grandpa left me $12.7 million. The words hung in the air like sawdust. My father's face went through several expressions before settling on shock. "What?" "Coins, mostly. Some properties. Investments he'd been making since before I was born. 12.7 million, give or take market fluctuations. But the investigator found what I wanted him to find, what Grandpa wanted him to find, because the money was never meant to be fought over. It was meant to be used, and not for me to live in luxury for this." I gestured around the workshop, meaning the foundation, the restored house, the chance to pass on what Grandpa had taught me. My father sat heavily on a stool. 12 million. "Does knowing that change how you feel about him?" I asked. "Does it make him worthy of respect now? Or does it just make you angry that he didn't share it?" "I don't know," he admitted. "I don't know what to feel." "Feel proud," I suggested. "Your father built something from nothing. He played a long game that none of us saw coming. He protected what he built from people who would have seen only its monetary value. And he passed it on to someone who understood that money is just a tool, not a treasure. I would have. You would have told him to invest it differently, to maximize returns, to leverage it into more. And you would have missed the point entirely. He already had everything he wanted. A home, work he enjoyed, a grandson who loved him. The money was just insurance set aside for the future. For me, my father was quiet for a long time. I was ashamed of him. I know. He knew too. Yes. And he forgave me? I thought about Grandpa's letter, about his hope that disappointment was just love wearing a disguise it didn't know how to take off. "He loved you," I said. "He never stopped loving you. He just stopped trying to earn your approval because he finally understood that your approval came with a price tag he wasn't willing to pay." "Which was being someone else." My father looked around the workshop, seeing it clearly for perhaps the first time. The careful organization, the quality tools bought one at a time over decades, the projects in various stages, each a lesson in patience and craftsmanship. "I don't know how to be different," my father said finally. "You don't have to be different. You just have to be willing to see that different isn't wrong. Connor wants to teach. Let him. Madison wants to travel, to write, to find her own path. Let her. Stop measuring your children's worth by their achievements and start measuring it by their happiness." Is that what he did? Measured by happiness? He measured by love. I said. Everything else was just details. My father stood to leave, then paused at the bottom of the stairs. The $10 in the will. Was it really just a key to the bank box? I pulled out my wallet and extracted the original $10 bill. The one Grandpa had given me by the lake when I was 15. Worn soft with age, the writing along the edge barely visible. This was his first earned money, I said. He bought a book with it, The Count of Monte Cristo. A story about a man who finds treasure where others see only stones. He gave it to me to remind me that value isn't always visible on the surface. The 10 in the will was to lead me to the rest, yes. But it was also a reminder. Some treasures don't fit in bank accounts. My father studied the bill, then handed it back. Keep it safe. I will. He climbed the stairs slowly, like a man carrying weight. At the door, he turned back. I'm proud of you, he said. I don't say that enough. Maybe I've never said it. But I am. Not because of the money or what you're doing with it. Because you became the man I was too afraid to let myself be. Then he was gone, leaving me alone in the workshop where so many of my important moments had happened. I ran my hand over the table I was refinishing, feeling the grain of the wood, the promise of beauty waiting to be revealed. That night, Connor and Madison came for dinner. We'd made it a weekly tradition, gathering in the kitchen where Grandpa and I had shared so many meals. Madison excitedly described a writing workshop she'd enrolled in. Connor talked about his student teaching, how alive he felt in the classroom. Dad came to see me, Connor said eventually, told me to follow my passion, nearly gave me a heart attack. Me too, Madison added. He actually asked about my writing, like really asked. Not just waiting for me to finish so he could tell me to minor in business. I smiled, thinking about Grandpa Joe and his long game. Even in death, he was still teaching lessons, still showing us that there are different ways to value a life. A toast, I proposed, raising my coffee mug, to Grandpa Joe, who knew that the best inheritance isn't what you leave behind. It's what you leave inside the people who loved you. We clinked mugs, 3 grandchildren finally understanding the wealth we'd inherited. Not the millions hidden in basement walls or tucked in bank boxes. The real treasure. The knowledge that we were worthy of love just as we were. That success meant more than achievement. That happiness wasn't something you earned but something you chose. Outside, snow began to fall, dusting Elm Street in white. The house creaked and settled around us. Solid, warm, and alive with memories. Somewhere I was certain Grandpa Joe was smiling. Hey, Madison said suddenly. What do you think Dad meant in the will? About some treasures not being measured in dollars. Connor and I exchanged glances, then burst out laughing. What? Madison demanded. What's so funny? Tell her, Connor said. Tell her what you told me about the coins. So I did. I told her about the hidden room, the rare coins, the properties, the investments. I watched her eyes grow wide as the numbers sank in. But why hide it? She asked. Why not just tell people? Because, I said, channeling Grandpa Joe, the minute people know about the money, that's all they see. They stop seeing the man who saved it, the love behind it, the lessons it represents. They just see dollar signs. Grandpa wanted us to see more than that. So what do we see? Madison asked. I looked around the kitchen where so much life had been lived. We see a man who loved us enough to play a 30-year-long game, who let himself be dismissed as a failure so that one day we could define success for ourselves, who taught us that the best revenge against people who undervalue you isn't proving them wrong. It's proving that their values were too small to begin with. We sat in comfortable silence, 3 grandchildren who'd found something more valuable than money in a rundown house on Elm Street. We'd found ourselves. We'd found each other. We'd found a different way to measure the worth of a life. And that, more than any amount of money, was Grandpa Joe's true legacy. The doorbell rang unexpectedly. I opened it to find Mr. Hartley, the lawyer, standing on the porch with snow in his hair and a briefcase in hand. "I'm sorry to intrude," he said, "but there's one more thing. Your grandfather left instructions that this be delivered exactly 6 months after the will reading. Today's the day." He handed me an envelope, thick with documents. "What is it?" I asked. Mr. Hartley smiled. "I believe your grandfather called it the rest of the story. Good evening, Mr. Mitchell. Give my regards to your brother and sister." I closed the door and returned to the kitchen, where Connor and Madison waited with curious expressions. "What now?" Connor asked. I opened the envelope. Inside was a letter in Grandpa's handwriting, and behind it, a document that made my hands shake. "Read it out loud," Madison urged. So I did. Dear Ethan, Connor, and Madison. Yes, I knew you'd all be together by now. If you're reading this, it means you've found your way to each other, just as I'd hoped. It also means you've learned the most important lessons I had to teach. But there's one more thing you need to know. Ethan, you weren't the only one I was saving for. Every grandchild had an account started the day they were born. Connor, Madison, your fathers never knew, because I learned early that Richard would see only the money and miss the meaning. But you each have your own collection, your own investments, your own future waiting. The amounts aren't equal. Ethan's is larger because I had more time with him, could better gauge what he'd need and how he'd use it. But there's enough for each of you to choose your own path, to disappoint or delight your parents as you see fit, to measure your worth by your own standards. Connor, yours is in coins from the years you were forbidden to see me, each one chosen with the teacher I knew you'd become in mind. Approximately 4 million, enough to teach without worrying about salary, to touch lives without counting costs. Madison, yours is in first edition books, the stories you loved but were told were frivolous, now worth enough to let you write your own. Approximately 3 million, enough to travel, to learn, to find your voice without asking permission. The keys to your safe deposit boxes are with Mr. Hartley. But remember, the money is just a tool. The real inheritance is knowing you're loved, knowing you're enough, knowing you have family who sees your true worth. All my love. Grandpa Joe. P.S. Tell your father I said checkmate. Asterisk. The kitchen erupted. Madison cried. Connor laughed. I did both. We hugged. A tangle of limbs, tears, and joy. 3 grandchildren who discovered that Grandpa Joe's long game was even longer than we'd imagined. He really saw us, Madison whispered. Even when he wasn't allowed to know us, he saw who we'd become. Checkmate, Connor repeated, shaking his head. He played chess while everyone else was playing checkers. We spent the rest of the night planning, dreaming, reimagining our futures with the freedom Grandpa's gift provided. Connor would start a school for kids who learned differently. Madison would really write without worrying about marketability. The foundation would expand, reaching more kids who needed what we'd found, not money, but belief in their own worth. As they prepared to leave, Madison asked, "Do we tell Dad?" Connor and I looked at each other, remembering our father's face when he'd learned about my inheritance. His struggle to reconcile the man he'd dismissed with the wealth he'd accumulated. Eventually, I said, when he's ready to see it as more than just money. When he can understand what Grandpa really left us. And what's that? Connor asked, though I think he already knew. Freedom, I said. Freedom to choose love over achievement. Freedom to measure success by happiness. Freedom to be ordinary and find that extraordinary. Freedom to know that we were always enough, just as we are. They left, and I stood on the porch watching their taillights disappear into the snowy night. The house on Elm Street stood solid behind me, no longer a symbol of failure, but a testament to a different kind of success. I thought about Grandpa Joe, about the quiet years he'd spent building futures for grandchildren he barely knew, about the patience it took to be dismissed as worthless while sitting on millions, about the love that said, "I'll let you think I'm nothing so that one day you can discover you're everything." The $10 bill was still in my wallet. I pulled it out, looking at the serial number that had started this journey. JE82415. Joseph Ethan. August 24, 2015. The day I told him I wanted to be happy more than exceptional. He'd heard me. He'd believed me. He'd spent the last years of his life making sure I'd have the chance to prove it. Tomorrow there would be lawyers and banks and financial decisions, family dynamics to navigate, a foundation to build. But tonight, there was just snow falling on Elm Street and the warmth of a house that had sheltered love for generations. I went back inside, closing the door on the cold. In the kitchen, Grandpa's crossword puzzle still waited, half-finished. I sat down and picked up his pencil, reading the clue he'd been working on. Treasure hidden in plain sight. The answer was 7 letters. I smiled and filled in the boxes. Grandpa. Then I made myself a cup of coffee, black like he'd taught me to drink it, and settled in to finish what he'd started. He'd spent his whole life finishing what he'd started with me, turning a boy who felt worthless into a man who knew better. And that, more than all the millions hidden in basement walls, was the real treasure. The one that had been there all along, waiting for someone to look past the surface and see its true worth. Just like Grandpa Joe had done with me.